Welcome to Directionally Correct, the People Analytics podcast with Cole and Scott. Today's guest is Shuba Gopal, me, principal at Glean Signals.
Thanks to our sponsors, Lightcast. The world is full of talent data, but more data can lead to more questions, uncertainty, and stagnation as organizations sift through it to figure out what's fact from what's fiction. Lightcast talent intelligence platform answers your most difficult workforce questions to drive meaningful business results. With more than 20 years of experience as MC in Burning Glass, Lightcast accelerates your work, bringing together hundreds of billions of vetted, constantly updated data points and incredible insights to drive strategic talent decisions. Your organization can tap into the deepest open repository of skills, supply, and demand data in the world to transform your hunches into a skills-based future for your organization. Lightcast's flexible solution, used by 67 of the Fortune 100, can integrate your own data, be guided by in-house talent experts, and give you the tools and confidence to explore it for yourself. To learn more, book a demo at lightcast.io. All opinions are our own and do not reflect those of any other organization.
I mean, like, people think it's so easy from the other side, right?
I know, as I was prepping for this, I was thinking, my gosh, what you guys should do is have more guest hosts, because then people would appreciate just how hard it is to do what you do.
Or they would be better than us, and then we would lose our jobs.
Oh, I seriously doubt that. Are you kidding me? It is hard work. I mean, I love the articles you sent me, but to find those like every week or 2 weeks, and yeah, this is hard work.
Oh yeah, tell me about it. Well, Gopal and I talk about this quite a bit. In fact, it's not that someone could do the podcast better. They clearly could, right? Someone could obviously be a better orator, have better points, all this sort of stuff. But it's showing up every week. That's the real grind that no one really talks about.
Waves of the ocean. Just keep rolling in every week.
I'm curious, what made you choose to make it a weekly podcast? Is there like some evidence that that's the right cadence?
Nope.
Okay.
You would think that we'd have some sort of rationale. I think we just did it 3 weeks in a row. It's like, well, you can do it next week, something like that. And
Okay.
yeah, and then I went buck wild and started booking people out like 6 months in advance. So it's really my fault. I regret it constantly. I think Scott does too, probably.
It takes a toll, definitely, and it's we talked to like really interesting people about really interesting stuff, and I can't wait to talk about like computational biology, etc. But just trying to find the articles and read through them, and I mean, on its own, it's not that bad, but it's the day job that you have too,
Yeah.
right? That trying to work it in. And we've been really lucky that we haven't had to reschedule any of these because of a surprise meeting, because that could definitely happen at any point.
Yeah, for real. Well, and Shuba, you must listen enough to know that we start before the guest gets here. Was that a little inside baseball that you joined us early?
No, it was mostly that I was like, oh, StreamYard, I've never used that. I better get on and see if it'll like accept my browser and whatever. Like I work off a Linux system, and sometimes these things don't cooperate. And it's like, I need time to like get the stupid Windows to boot up if this doesn't work. So,
Wait, you use a Linux operating system? That's wild.
yeah, well, it's computational biology is a cheap field, man. We cannot afford anything that isn't open source and already free.
I used to put oh god, I can't remember what it was called, but it was a Linux open source Linux operating system on all my laptops. As soon as they get too old, like I'll start experimenting and put a little penguin. I can't remember what it's called.
Might be. Oh yeah, I can picture it and I can't remember, but it doesn't matter. Anyway.
It doesn't matter, but that's how I know that the laptop's about to be. It's not long for the world at that point once it gets Linux on it, because you got like all your open office and all this sort of stuff at that point.
Well, so Linux has come a long way. I mean, way back when I was in grad school and we were doing it, it was a nightmare. You couldn't get anything to work, and it was just like almost like DOS level stupidity. But it's gotten really fancy. I mean, I have Ubuntu on this one, and
Ubuntu. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, and most people can't tell the difference between this and a Windows or a Mac. It looks a lot like a Mac, like the interface and everything. The behavior is very much like a Mac.
I've been playing around with a, Raspberry Pi, and it's
Yeah.
got this like weird little operating system on it. I got showed the call. Like I made this like art project where essentially I record friends and family, and it just plays it on a loop. It's supposed to be
Mhm.
like my Harry Potter portraits, where like people are just kind of looking around at you. But it's got this like interesting little scaled down operating system the interface with.
Yeah, I haven't played as much with it, partly because my passion is more like, what can I make the computer do for me as opposed to like, what will it make me do to it? You know?
I didn't look in too much into your background, Shu, but where'd you go to school? You mentioned when you're in grad school, you were doing things on the cheap. If not now,
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, well, so undergrad, I went to Sarah Lawrence College, which is a small liberal arts school. Depending on who you're talking to, that either means that they know it's incredibly rigorous academics or like wild feminist parties. So they're both
Yeah.
true. I was more in the incredibly rigorous academic side of the school. I did not attend a single wild feminist party while I was there, but they were happening. I just wasn't part
Yeah.
of it. Um,
She
because
was
my
she was
best friend
so
and
bitter that she didn't get the invite to the wild feminist parties.
No, here's the thing. My best friend and I, we were like the sole nerds at the school. And our idea of a fun Friday night, I'm not kidding, was to go to the library. This is in the late 90s. Go to the library and look up weird new diseases that were emerging and like read the primary literature. That was our idea of a fun Friday night. Like there is nothing more nerdy. I mean, you ask for idiosyncratic, there you go. I'm like, that was my college experience.
See, and I was thinking we were going to be talking about the smell of bacon.
Oh yeah, we can talk about that too.
No, that's so much better. It's like talk about a rigorous school. This is what the kids that go to this school do on Friday night.
So
I
hit us with some of the more unique ones. What's some more
yeah.
memorable ones y'all found?
So we did in the mid '90s. I think was the first instances of hantaviruses in the
Yeah.
Southwest. And so we did a lot of reading on hantaviruses, and then Ebola. I think there was a small outbreak, sort of mid to late '90s. So we
Mm-hmm.
were super pumped about that. We read every paper on Ebola that we could get our hands on.
Come on, Ebola. Where you
Yeah,
at,
and
stars?
then
We're Team Ebola. Is that what we are now? Oh man.
I get to read a bit of computational biology. I do a bunch of network analytics, and some of the best network analytic research comes out of biology. So it's like you can I see how to apply them into people analytics sort of stuff, but it's all about like protein sequencing and like how the network of proteins interact to produce whatever. And it's just it's fantastic that we can borrow from different areas and apply them back into people analytics in this way. I'm sure you've experienced the same thing.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the what I love about people analytics as a field, at least as I've experienced it. I mean, I always feel a bit of a dilettante talking to real IO psychologists like you. I remember years ago I met Alexis Fink, and she was like, we were the people analytics people before there were people analytics. And I'm like, yeah, I know. I'm like, I, I'm new to the bunch, but I
Wait,
love that.
Alexa was your very first IO to talk to?
Yeah, pretty much.
Hey, start off strong there, boy. It's all downhill.
You went straight to Mount Rushmore.
I was like, okay, then I'll just go back to my small world. But what I was going to say is that, like, I find that as a field, it's really open and inviting to other perspectives. So, to your point, I feel like there are methods that people analytics pulls from, say, biology or Cole and I have talked about, like these ecology approaches to network analysis that I think are really powerful. And I just think that that's part of what makes it such a vibrant and productive field is that it's open to ideas from other disciplines, and not every field is like that. So that's part of what I like about it. Also, now that I've made my home here, I have to kind of justify being here, I guess, since I don't have an IO psychology degree.
Well, yeah, I think it's a learning opportunity, right? Like we get to borrow from other areas. Like I don't think we do enough. What do they read? Simulation work. There's
Yeah,
so much more in computational biology that we don't really touch on that
Yeah.
in people analytics that much. Like a little bit in like agent based modeling, but once
yeah.
again, you're kind of in the network analytic field. But otherwise, it's standard errors. I mean, it's not true simulation work.
Well, Shuba, hit us with some of the things that people analytics folks could learn from computational biology, because I know when we've chatted in the past, you've kind of blown my mind a few times, and so I'd love to learn from you.
Okay. I guess I should finish up your previous question, Scott, which was where did I go to grad school? I went to a very small place, the Rockefeller University. It's on the Upper East Side in Manhattan. It has more Nobel laureates on its faculty than any other university in the country, but it is entirely focused on biomedical research. And so it is a weird place. There were no wild feminist parties there, but there was also no library, which was bizarre. But this was like the early 2000s. The internet existed, so it was fine, but it was very strange. They had...
And the professors were the library. It's like, just go talk to them.
Yeah, they had this building that was called the library, but you would go in there and there were no books. There was nothing. There was just like paintings of old white men. And then in this entire 5-story building, there was no ladies' room. Like there's a restroom that's marked men. There is no women's restroom. It was just like an ode to white male supremacy. It was like, okay, this is not useful. I'll just go back to my lab.
So you went from like Sarah Lawrence, which was all feminism all the time, to the Rockefeller.
Whatever the opposite of that is.
It might as well be St. Andrew's Golf Course, where it's like no women allowed.
Yeah.
Exactly. You know, you got to like have a diverse set of experiences, and by God, you cannot get farther on the spectrum.
Hopefully, we're the happy medium in there.
Yeah.
You are welcome to Directionally Correct.
Yes. Okay, so back to the thing about computational biology. I think you're exactly right. I think one of the areas where computational biology has really built powerful tools is in dealing with small sample sizes, because for a lot of these experiments or studies, you're never going to have big sample sizes. You're studying a rare disease, maybe 100 people in the entire world have it. You're just going to have those 100 people. Like, you're never going to have more samples. So you have to build the methods that get you robust results even without big sample sizes. So like exactly like you said, simulation, super powerful, but we never use it outside of computational biology, because everywhere else you'd be like, well, I'm just going to recruit 100 more people or 1,000 more people and solve my sample size problem. But I think that's one area. The other piece that I think could be used more in people analytics, but I don't see it as much, is permutation testing. Yeah, which is actually really powerful, and it's like the go-to thing for computational biologists. You have a small sample size, no problem. We're just going to do permutation testing until we get an answer. I used it at the Broad Institute when I was there. We were looking at gender pay equity, so looking at pay across all these different categories. And at the time, the organization was relatively small. It was about 1,100 people, but it is also a very flat organization. Lots of really innovative scientists, and they like to make up their own job titles. So for 1,100 people, there were like 450 unique job titles. Like you're trying to do pay equity, and like, does Cole and Scott do the same thing? Who knows? They have entirely different titles.
We've been wondering that for a long time.
I mean, it makes sense in that situation. Like, you're essentially trying to decouple from the normal distribution, which you're going to be impossible to get normal distribution with such small sample sizes, right? Yeah. At least you can, or like it's skewed. Yeah. I mean, I guess I make the same point twice, right? Absolutely.
Yeah.
We need to incorporate this.
Yeah, exactly. So I found, like, with permutation testing, we could get around some of these weird snowflake job title problems. I mean, we did some work to like aggregate them a little bit, but permutation testing ended up being really critical for us to be able to say for sure, to have any confidence that we didn't have a significant pay gap, because if you just ran the numbers the way they were, you'd get this ridiculous gap. And it was like, that can't be right. We've got a decent compensation team. They can't be doing such a terrible job. And so so I think with small sample sizes, there's stuff like simulation and permutation testing that are incredibly powerful. And I would love to see more of that in people analytics, but I guess hasn't happened yet. Yes, Cole.
Well, that's where I kind of I found out about you, Shuba, was your Wharton People Analytics Conference presentation on pay equity from your time at Broad. But I'm curious. So you mentioned both permutation analysis and then creating these kinds of these simulations around. What is the benefit to people analytics, and like what are some use cases in people analytics where you might use those, and kind of make the case for why people should be aware of them and they should be using them?
Yeah. So with permutation, I think there are probably more applications for permutation testing in people analytics than, I mean, the simulation stuff is really powerful on the network side. So I'll get to that in a minute. But for a lot of like your daily bread people analytics work, like pay equity, like modeling probability of retention, modeling probability promotion, um, you can use permutation testing to better understand what is the distribution in your data versus the normal distribution, and then account for that correctly. So even if you've got skewed distributions, you can still do the modeling, make sure you're building a reasonably good model and making reasonably good predictions. And the permutation testing can give you that confidence. So I think that's where I would say it. But is that like too data sciencey an answer? I could try again.
Absolutely not.
You're in the right place to give a data sciencey answer.
Okay, good. Because when I'm talking to HR teams, I'm always like, take the data science hat off, Shuba. So sometimes like,
They don't know what a correlation is. They use it improperly all the time.
well, the one that gets me, I love the folks in HR. They have such hard jobs, and I really admire what they do. But it always gets me when they're like, remind me again why the p-value has to be small. And I'm like, because you don't want random effects. If it's big, it means it's random.
I mean, but are HR people really the best? I mean, come on.
Well, so here's what I will say. There are some parts of HR that are just mystifying to me, like the L&D function. Like somehow they're always well-funded. Like I've never been in an organization where people are like, well, let's just cut out all the training. Like they're really well-funded. And yet they're offering stuff that, to me anyway, doesn't always translate into meaningful outcomes for people or the business, right? Like, do you really want to take a class on influencing without authority? Like, will that actually help you grow your career? Does it help the company? Like, I've never seen any evidence that it does. And yet that's what they're doing. They're like, yeah, you should take influencing without authority, managing up, whatever. And I'm like, meanwhile, what really matters is that you go to meetings and meet new people across the organization, build yourself a network that's wide and powerful, and feel like you belong at the place. Like these are the things that actually make you effective in your job. I don't know that managing up helps.
I see the same thing with like DEI functions. Like they get like kind of lost in these sort of kind of like more softer sort of things. But like if you just tell people like include everyone in the meeting, reach out across groups, like find diverse perspectives, i.e., just like people far away that you never talk to,
Yeah.
you'd be way more effective and essentially develop a broader sense of inclusion in that way, and be easier to measure too.
Yeah, Cole and I wrote this article last year for his newsletter about how like belonging is almost certainly the result of network effects. Like I don't have the data to prove it, but this is my hypothesis that when you have these wide, shallow networks across an organization, you're going to
Yeah.
have higher belonging because you see people in the hallway and you kind of know who they are and you know what they do. They know who you are. Like I mean, like those are the things that, and that's how like to your to the paper that you have for this week. Like that's how innovation happens. You got to explore before you can do really deep creative work. That's what benefits the company. And yet we're all like, you should take influencing without authority.
I think it's one of the side effects of coming to the office. I understand that like no one really wants to go in the office, this sort of stuff. But when you walk in, like you understand people's, you know their dog's name and all this sort of stuff. Like it's a sense of community,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And hey, don't get me wrong, like staying home and like being effective and not having to commute, awesome, totally awesome. But we've come to a place where people get a lot of their life satisfaction from work, including social relations.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And coming to the
Yeah.
office is part of that.
Yeah. And I think the challenge is if you're going to go in the office looking for community, but everyone else is home having a grand old time in
Yeah.
their home office, then like kind of, right? So like, how do you get everyone to sort of show up short of mandating, which I think is not very effective? Like, there's got to be a reason to come in beyond sort of the vague, like, oh, there'll be community. I mean, free snacks only gets you in once a month, I think.
Yeah, and imagine if they don't even have that. I mean, goodness.
Yeah, exactly. There's just like, just show up in the office. Yeah.
I think about just going back to what you were saying, kind of about L&D, and then also about the DEIB stuff. I find that like HR functions sometimes just have an aversion or an allergy to accountability or even to measuring the efficacy of what they're doing. And I think that is where people analytics is so important. Is like we actually kind of force the issue of
Yeah.
making sure that we know what we're doing is working as an HR function.
I think this is where
Yeah.
like computational biology perhaps it makes it like an easier transition because in organizations I've worked in a couple like sometimes people have a a vested interest in something working say an L&D result and like you start getting some like weird sort of behaviors like being cherry picking data and this sort of stuff to show a positive result because it kind of depends on it, where if a gene does not mutate in the right way or the structure of the protein does not manifest in the right 3D orientation, you're like, we'll try something different, right?
Right.
But if
Yeah.
someone's career depends on their like function working, now we get like a different animal.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think that's so I will say the other thing, one of the other things that computational biology really drilled into me that I sometimes worry about with HR teams and to some extent with people analytics teams. In the computational biology space, we're absolutely like exploring the data, playing with it, the consequences of like doing
Mm-hmm.
some crazy analysis and not getting the right answer is relatively low. But we're always really like right from grad school, you're just really drilled into the importance of the ethics of it. Like these data sets are anonymized for a reason. These are real people with real diseases, and we are working to try and cure them, right? Like there's
Yeah.
that commitment to getting it right. And I don't necessarily see that all the time. Like I see HR teams are super risk averse if they think there's going to be some kind of legal consequence for what they're doing. But otherwise, they're kind of like, we're just checking some boxes and like, doing whatever. The question that drives me absolute crazy: what is everybody else in the field doing? And I'm like, nowhere else in the business would people be like, what else? Let's just copy what like the guy down the road is doing. Everywhere else, we're like, what can we do that would be innovative and competitive edge? In HR, we're like, what's everyone else doing? like, and that's like, it just drives me crazy that there isn't that same sort of commitment to these are real people, these are their livelihoods. We have the amazing privilege and opportunity to make this a meaningful experience for them while supporting the business. Let's do it right. Like there's not that. There's just kind of like, what is everyone else doing? We'll just do that.
So are you calling for like more localized sort of treatment of folks, or like just more deeper understanding of the organizational pressures and what employees are facing within your
Yeah,
specific organization?
exactly. Like take the time in your organization to figure out what is it that your people are experiencing. What do you want them to have?
Mm-hmm.
Like what kind of an experience would be better? And how's that going to feed into the business? And then to Cole's point, then you could measure it and be like, yeah,
Yeah.
influencing without authority makes no difference to the business, but leadership development courses for like mid-level managers, huge impact. So let's do that, right? Like then you'd have that commitment to like we're actually doing this because we care about the people in the business, as opposed to like we're
Well,
here to like
and speaking of that, we're almost, nowadays with generative AI advances on the other side of the question of do we even need kind of middle managers, or do we
mm,
need them to be effective? And I know you and I had written an article, but it was your ideas and your thesis about the phoenix and the dragon and the unlikely virtue of managers. I don't know. Do you want to talk about that at all, Shuba?
yeah, I'm super passionate about this topic as so that's why I wrote this article because I couldn't stop talking to Call about it. And finally, I was like, just write it down. Stop talking to me about it. I mean, he was too polite to say the "stop talking to me about it" part, but that was my view. Anyway, yes. So I actually think mid-level managers have a huge impact on the people aspect of the work, right? Like they can be effective coaches. We've all had the great manager who made a huge difference in our lives and the horrible managers who like made everything horrible. And I think the reason is, especially now in, with knowledge work, the manager isn't there to like count how many widgets you made on the factory line anymore. The manager has to be this person who's kind of that connective tissue for the team. They're the one who can figure out like what does the team need to be effective, who needs coaching, who needs a new assignment, who needs to be meeting so and so from this other department. That's a really critical job but it's not one that we're actually training managers for. So, I mean, in academia, it's the worst model ever because the more technically proficient you are, the higher you go up in the ladder, right? So you end up with these incredibly technically proficient, truly awful people, right? Like they just don't know how to interact with other people. They can only talk to their computer algorithms. And that's where, in my mind, something like AI could be incredibly powerful, generative AI, or where you help managers do the things that make them human and hand off all these like really routine tasks that computers are just way better and way more efficient at doing than we'll ever be. Like, why make people into machines? I mean, we had to when we built factories. We were like, yeah, everyone should be out there like making their little widgets on this assembly line, and productivity is how many of these widgets you make in an hour. We're not, for a lot of work now, we're not there. Like, it doesn't matter if you wrote 3 documents yesterday if they were crap. I mean,
Yeah.
nothing how many documents you wrote.
So
So
does that make me a phoenix or am I a dragon?
yeah, this is where our analogy kind of fell apart, even in the article. So the phoenix is the type of work. So it's burning down and being reinvented, and AI is the dragon. It could be really terrifying in
Oh,
people, or it
okay.
could be the energy and the fire that rebirths the phoenix. I think.
And it's no coincidence that there's a picture of a phoenix behind Shuba right
Oh yeah,
now. So
Oh, okay. It's all coming together.
yeah. I
yeah,
don't want to be culturally appropriating other cultures, but I've loved the concept of the spirit animal, and I've decided mine's the phoenix.
there you go.
Is the phoenix your spirit animal?
That's my yes. I've decided. I don't know if that's how it works in the actual cultures that use spirit animals. I've just decided that's mine.
I told Cole, like, my spirit animal is a little kid I saw at a pizza place while his friends were running around. He was playing on his iPhone. That's my
Oh, there
spirit
you go.
animal.
Oh, that's so sad at so many levels. Oh, but well, I think the thing I liked about well, I've first of all, I've loved working with you, Shuba, and I keep telling you, you have like this beautiful mind that's just so wonderful. Like I love the way that you see things. But one of the things I loved about the Phoenix and the Dragon was kind of like, why don't we get generative AI to automate management and
Mhm.
then leave leadership? Because those are two different things, right? And so if we can get managers focusing on leadership and not on just these, parochial task of management, that would be really great. But I don't know. I think about like why aren't we doing more in this space as people analytics to help out making that future state happen? I don't know. Could
Mhm.
we be doing more?
That's a great question. Could we be doing more? I mean, a lot of people analytics teams kind of sit back and wait for somebody to ask a question, and then
Mhm.
they'll go crunch some numbers and come back with like, ta-da, we have a thing. Um, I think for us to people analytics could be doing more, but we'd have to change that mindset where we're just instead of sort of passively waiting for that, we'd have to be much more engaged in beyond HR, honestly, engaged in the
Mhm.
business to understand like what are these questions that actually matter. I love what you said, Cole, a couple episodes ago, I guess, where you were like, yeah, people always need to be thinking about the business needs and the business impact instead of just about like what's happening with the people. And I think it's so important. And a lot of people analytics teams, especially as they get buried inside the HR function, they're just really like little mice running around, like crunching numbers and producing little fluffy bits, and like not really driving the question anymore. You're just sort of pulling the handles.
Absolutely.
I mean, Fisher talked about this in the 1930s. Like a lot of what researchers do is for intellectual stimulation. All right, they
Yes.
find it personally rewarding. They go
Yep.
in, collect the data, and just kind of analyze it and figure out the result. But it doesn't necessarily mean it has broad impact, and it's just
Right.
kind of a natural condition of the field.
Yeah. Whereas, like finance teams, I don't know finance team very well, but in my experience, the finance team has already figured out that the questions, the answers, everything is over there in the business side of things. And so they're
Hmm.
like, people listen to them because they already are, they're crunching the numbers for money, which matters. But I think they have cracked that nut better, certainly better than HR overall, and maybe even better than people analytics has
Oh
so
yeah.
far.
They've definitely cracked it better than HR, but I kind of dislike all this finance love that people analytics always gives to finance, because they're like, oh, these brilliant people, we should be more like them. And it's like, have you ever talked to people in finance? Their solution to everything is, well, we should control those costs a little bit better. If we could just control those costs, things should be, and people are like, wow, they're so wise. It's like, they're not wise. All they do is repeat themselves over and over again.
Yes, exactly. And that it drives me nuts because at least the HR people are like, remind me again where the p-value should be small. The finance people are like, we don't care about the p-value. We're just going to cut more costs. And you're like, no, the point is not the cost. The point is the impact.
You don't get fired for cutting costs.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. It's like an unimpeachable statement. But I did want to come back to, just because I thought this is interesting from prepping for the podcast. You hate the smell of bacon, Shuba? Tell us
Yes.
about this. How is that even possible?
Well, yeah, I know. It's a hard thing. Okay, so here's some more idiosyncratic facts about me. I didn't grow up in the US. I was born here. My parents have wanderlust. I still can't, like, they still are never in the same place for more than a week or two. They're retired now, so like, and we have cell phones, so it's fine. But even when they were young scientists, they like to wander around. So I didn't grow up in the US, and we were vegetarian, partly culturally and partly because my dad had strong opinions about it. And my mom just hates cooking. So she's like, whatever, you cook. If you have opinions about it, you cook, it's fine. So when I came back to the US, was the first time in many, many years that I smelled bacon. And it was just, I can't tell you. It's just like, it's too fatty and oily and like greasy. It's like, ugh, I can't stand it. Sorry.
Smells like Louisiana.
Yeah.
Smells like home.
In good ways and bad ways. Oh my gosh. But I guess maybe it was from that world traveling, Shuba. I think you were trained as a classical Indian dancer. Is that true?
Yeah, it is. I haven't done it in years. I do still love to dance. So, and I'm not very good at it, but like any opportunity, I'll get out there and dance. There was a company party years ago that I was at, and they had a dance floor. Nobody was dancing. This is a group of scientists. So yeah, everyone else is standing around awkwardly staring at their shoes, and I'm out there like booying like crazy. And my 3-year-old kid comes up to me and is like, "Mom, you are embarrassing me. Come back over here." And I'm like, "You're 3. How can you be embarrassed?"
But you're the DJ's friend, because every DJ needs the first person to come out on the dance floor. You're like, it's like kryptonite if you don't have them.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was the only one for the entire hour and a half that poor DJ was begging people to come out. It was just me. And finally I got my 3-year-old out there with me. It's like, whatever, you can dance too.
Cole loves to dance too. Like, he's the first one out there.
Oh yeah?
I do love to
Awesome.
dance.
He can
I've
get
been known
down.
to-
He can get down. Cut some rug.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Shuba, like, I know in prepping for the podcast, like, I wanted to talk to you about computational biology, but I think there were a few things that you were like, Cole, nobody, when the guests come on there, nobody ever asks you questions. Did you have anything you wanted to talk to us about?
Oh yes. I have at least 2 topics. But I'll start with the easier one first, which is like you're both at organizations with big workforces. You've got plenty of data at your hands. But I'm curious, do you find that having too much data is as much of a problem as having too little? Like what are the challenges you run into? Like besides the data management part of it?
That's a good question. You have
It's
any
like
initial
inside
thoughts?
baseball. Can't really get into some of it.
Yeah.
But as far as like the wealth of data, yeah, I mean, it can be difficult to pull, like, just computationally. Like, you're talking about, like, say, like, uh, I won't get too deep into it, but like, if you're gonna pull like a billion rows of data,
Yeah.
like, that'll crash. That'll wreck your shit quick. Definitely.
It'll crash your Excel file for
Yeah.
sure.
Oh. Oh yeah. Oh my God. Several years. Oh boy, you just set me on a different sort of tangent here. I'll spit this out quickly. This is several years ago. I was talking to this girl, and she's like, yeah. She's like, it took me like 48 hours to merge Excel files. She was essentially doing a VLOOKUP across like millions of rows, and it was taking all weekend. She's like, yeah, just let it go all weekend. It's like, holy shit, this is insane behavior that you're doing. You can do this in like 2 seconds in R.
Yeah, like, just get a little SQL, just a tiny bit of SQL knowledge would have saved you so much headache. But Well, back to your question though, Shuba. I think when you have any kind of like surplus of something, you devalue it, right?
Mm,
And so like if you've got so much data, you sometimes forget seeing the forest for the trees, which is what are some good hypotheses I need to test,
mhm,
right? And it becomes almost like cognitively overwhelming if you've got too much data to really narrow it down to like, okay, what is the specific problem I want to tackle, and what are the specific pieces of data within this, gargantuan universe that you have to tackle it. And I think that's where I mean, I don't know. I always use these terms kind of colloquially, but like kind of the left brain, right brain nature of people analytics. Like some folks are more on one side than the other, and it really requires the synthesis of both to be
mhm.
effective. And so you really can have too much of a good thing.
Yeah. That I was wondering about that because I was wondering, do you end up because it becomes so vast, do you end up you have to segment it in order to manage it, analyze it, answer meaningful questions, and do you worry then that you've lost, like, something in that? Like, you've brought the sample size down to a size you can manage, but now you kinda, like you're only solving the problem for, like, 10% of your people instead of
Mm-hmm.
There's also like, what
Absolutely.
they call like the arrogance of narrow differences. So it's like
Mhm.
you could create a million features from one data set, like how different are they really? And just
Yep.
because you find like significant results doesn't necessarily mean that you're finding unique, valuable information.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, that was the reason I asked this question is like computational biology had this challenge, right? Like in the
Mhm.
90s, in the late 90s, early 2000s, these genomes were being sequenced, and we went from like teeny bits and dribbles of data to like crazy amounts of data. So then, yes, there was very much that Excel moment where people were like, oh, yeah, maybe we shouldn't use Excel to do this anymore. And then, like obviously data scientists and so on came into the field and it shifted. And now, it's like billions and billions of genomes being
Yeah.
sequenced and all this stuff. And I think exactly as you were saying, there's a little bit of this tendency to be like, well, everything's significant, so nothing is meaningful. We should
Yeah.
find some clever new, like we should find some clever new technique. It's like, no, you probably just need to like ask a better question.
Or use that logistic regression. It's all
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, the computational biologists are definitely creating clones of us now. So that's thank you for sharing that with us, Shuba. But are you ready for some confusion matrix?
Oh yes,
The confusion matrix.
I love this phrase. I love this new segment of yours. So yeah.
Cole specifically said we should do some research roulette with you, Shuba. But
Okay.
okay, let me just back up. What I've always wanted, and maybe you're the only person that can tell me where to get this, is how like you have like a family portrait above like a fireplace. So you got mom, dad, kids, whatever. I would love to get my DNA sequence and just get those like little lines, and like you have like you and your partner and like maybe your kids next to you. I think it'd be cool to have over the fireplace.
I have bad news for you, Scott.
Can you not do that? Is that illegal?
No, it's not that it's not illegal, it's that we no longer sequence DNA by running it out on a gel and making those little bars
Yeah,
anymore.
yeah, yeah.
Now it's all, like, fancy laser tagged, um, chemical synthesis, and, like, it comes out as a readout of, like, letters.
Damn
It's
it.
it's super boring. I mean, it's really, really sophisticated.
Let's do lasers. That would be fun.
Yeah.
I need a hipster biologist. Old school steampunk biologist. Okay, anyway, so we're gonna get into this. The task is very simple.
Okay,
I have 3 articles here. 1 is real, 2 are fake. Your task is to identify the real one. Okay.
okay, it's gonna be terrible. I'm not even
Well,
in your field.
Cole's not very good at it either, so don't worry about
And by not very good, I mean he means I've never gotten it right because I've never gotten it right.
it. Okay, article number
Who
1.
thinks it's better? Yeah.
Number 1, ovulatory cycle effects on tip earnings by lap dancers. Economic evidence from human estrus. This is 2007 study from the Evolution and Human Behavior journal rather.
I'm gonna go ahead and say that's not it, which means it's
That's
going
not
to
it.
be it.
Okay, number 2, the effects of seasonal changes on barista tipping patterns. A study of weather influence and customer generosity. 2019 from the Journal of Behavioral Economics and Social Sciences.
I think that's my guess, but I'm gonna wait for number
You going
3.
with that? And finally, the impact of music tempo on fitness class attendance and performance. Evidence from a controlled experiment, 2021 Journal of Sports Psychology and Performance. So we have ovulation and lap dancer tipping patterns. You have tipping patterns of barista based on the weather, and the impact of music tempo on fitness class attendance and performance.
They're all equally implausible, but I'm gonna go with the first one. And the only reason is that I have this I could be totally wrong, but I have this vague recollection that there are changes in scent patterns for other mammals. I don't know if it applies to humans, but maybe it does when they grow
Yeah.
up. So maybe it applies to humans too.
Well, and we haven't done this one in a while, and I just remembered our video editor actually gave me a tip or a hint that Scott might be tipping his hand when he reads these, and I think it's number one. So I'm gonna see. I'm not gonna say
Oh,
how I know, but I think it's number one just because of what the video editor said.
Gosh damn
oh,
it. I'm being
okay.
sold out. It is. It is number one. It is.
All
It is
right.
number one. Ovulatory cycle effects on tipping by lap dancers. So they recorded 18 dancers, recorded their menstrual periods, work shifts, tip earnings for 60-day period. Normally, cycling participants earned about $335 per 5-hour shift during estrus, $260 per shift during luteal phase. I'm sorry, I don't know these terms, and $185 during menstruation. By contrast, participants using contraceptive pills showed no earnings peaks across the cycle. That's really wild.
There's some important takeaway here for normal people who are not lap dancers, but I am not sure what it is.
I think that's kind of the point of the podcast is that should be our branding slogan. It's like, I think there's something important here. We're just not sure what it is.
We're just talking research. I've heard that women on contraceptive pills will also take random mating patterns. So, like, if they're not on the pill, they will identify, say, mates that have an opposite immune system response or
Mhm.
something like that. But when they're on the pill, it's like their mating habits are just random.
Wow. But there's so many places we could go that probably
Yeah.
not family friendly with that topic. So
It's our
we're
first
gonna stop.
biologist. We gotta get it all out now.
Well, how about we just go and do some nerdery? You want to do some nerdery, Shuba?
Yes, please. I can't wait to talk about these papers.
The nerdery. All right. So the first one I've got is about testing theory of mind in large language models in humans. So this comes from Nature Human Behavior, and the authors are talking about can LLMs ostensibly do they have a theory of mind, or can they conceptualize a theory of mind? And for those of you who aren't familiar, the theory of mind is just the ability to track other people's mental states. And what they found is they tested two families of LLMs, GPTs and Llama 2, and they used a sample of 1,900 human participants. And the GPT-4 models, in particular, were able to be at or exceeding human levels at identifying indirect requests, false beliefs, and misdirection, but they struggled with detecting faux pas. And there's a few other examples here, but I'll kind of turn it over to you guys. Were you expecting that LLMs were going to be able to have a theory of mind so soon? And if this is the worst that they will ever be, because I mean, I'm sure they'll figure out faux pas here before long. If this is the worst they'll ever be, what implications does that have, for human interaction with these type of AIs?
It's a weighty question, and like I would even say like ChatGPT 3.5, the first version that was publicly available, had a substantial leg up in this. So like theory of mind, like trying to infer the meaning from what you're saying. So like example they use here is she was like, "Yo, it's hot in here," i.e. Cole, open the window. Right? She didn't say open the window, but that's what she really means. Or like, it's dark in here. Let's turn the
Yeah.
lights.
And I'm pretty sure I don't have a theory of mind.
Well, I mean, that's another element. There are a lot of people out there that take the world very literally and do not recognize this as well as a computer, clearly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that was my reaction, was like, "Wow, look at this. GPT is already more human than we are." And I
Yeah.
was just honestly, I was so charmed by its response to the faux pas question where it's like, you're supposed to like the human response is like, "Oh, obviously the person made a faux pas. They said something they shouldn't have said." And instead ChatGPT was like, "Well, there's some possibilities. Maybe they didn't know what was going on. Maybe they're really bitchy." And I was just like, "Oh, it's so adorable." I It's like really the extreme version of benefit of the doubt. Like maybe they just didn't know what was going on. Like, no,
Well, it's
no,
like
they
there's a
knew.
level of innocence or something
Yeah.
like that. Yeah. Or just giving people the benefit of the doubt. I don't know.
Yeah. But it reminded me a little bit of I don't play poker, but I read Nate Silver's newsletter, and he's always talking about poker. I read him because I love the way he takes like an economics perspective on like political forecasting and stuff like that. But anyway, every now and then he writes the thing about poker, and recently he wrote this thing about how in poker there are these people called nits, and a nit is somebody who's like so risk averse they screw everything up and lose all their money in a poker tournament because they never take the risks that they're supposed to take when they need to. And I was like, oh, ChatGPT is a nit. It doesn't want to take any risk to offend anybody or say anything. It's just like totally know what you're thinking, but I'm gonna pretend that I'm super nice and I'm just gonna give you benefit of the doubt.
Boy, I'm
That's
totally a
wild.
nit, boy. Like I will get blinded to death and just be like, well, that was fun. There goes $20.
Yeah.
I'm playing poker. Like, I don't know if a king queen is good enough. I'm just gonna throw this in the pot.
Yeah.
I feel like this got to be somewhat related to being on tilt. But, I don't know if that's what a nit is. I've never heard that expression before.
No, it was the first time I heard it too, but I was like, oh, this is a word I need in my vocabulary. Yeah. The hyper
Absolutely.
risk averse person.
But it is amazing. Like these tests that they're giving you, the hinting test, the false belief test, recognition of faux pas, and strange stories test. Like these are things you typically give to like I don't know, like 4-year-old children to understand like their
Yeah.
mental functioning. Like, i.e., does this person know what I know? Right? Do they
Yeah.
understand? Do I have hidden knowledge that they don't have? Which kids will typically fail, and you know it's already performing at a decent level, right?
Yeah. I feel like there's a part of this, like, where if you're at a dinner party, I feel like all that people around you are doing are trying to test your theory of mind. I find that to be exhausting. Like maybe I should be talking to these LLMs a little bit more because they're a little bit more naive and they're going to give me a get out of jail free card when I say something weird and random. I don't know.
Well, I mean, you bring up an interesting point because you talk about like social media. We're served different information overall,
Mm.
right? So, like, one person may get hyper, we'll call it left wing material, and some person will get hyper right wing material. And of course, they walk away from social media thinking, well, my side's right. Like, all the evidence points to
Yeah.
me
Yeah.
being right. But, you get in the room, like, literally have access to different sources of information. Of course, you're gonna have different sort of conclusions where, a computer in theory could ingest it all.
Well, clearly, if they just listened to Directionally Correct, they would have the appropriate opinions on things. So at least we're providing that public service. Well done, guys.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I guess after I read the article, I was like, why was I surprised that GPT did as well as it did? It has consumed the vast
Yeah.
quantity of human knowledge, at least in the English language, that is possible to consume. If it couldn't do as well as a person, it would kind of be a sad day,
Yeah.
right?
Why? Like here's my thought. Why isn't it better?
Yeah.
Like if it's read everything a human being has ever written in any format, shouldn't it be better than this already? I don't know. That's kind of where I'm at.
Apparently, Wikipedia's taken a hit from ChatGPT or Gen AI. I'll put it in broad terms.
Mhm.
Got Anthropic, etc. But what was like the central node in the wo- World Wide Web is starting to falter a little bit.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's wow. That's sad. I love
Some
it.
people are saying that like these AIs are going to shepherd in the post kind of internet era. right?
Mhm.
It's
Yeah,
like,
Web 3.0 or whatever.
Yeah.
yeah, like, do you really even need a Wikipedia when you have a Chat GPT or,
Mhm,
like GPT-6, let's call it, right?
mhm.
So like something that's just superhuman on every single topic. Like, why would you even need the internet for most things?
I mean,
Right.
like, I don't I treat ChatGPT as like Google. Like, I'll just Google things like, "Hey, how can I," especially recipes where, like, you get a web page from Google and it's like, "When I was a little girl on the farm," you're like, "Hey, just give me the recipe." Like, I'm just trying to figure out what the temperature to bake chicken is. Like, why do I gotta learn about your past with
It's
your
little nuggets like this that make me realize that Scott and I have very different lives.
You do you know what I'm talking about? You, like, look up a recipe online, and it's just, like, 4 pages about, like, the wind blowing across the plains and shit.
Just it was the when I was a little girl.
Yeah, that's what it says.
What is this?
You wanna go somewhere else?
Yeah, sure.
A different mental place anyway?
Let's talk about some hot streaks. How about
Hot
that?
streaks,
Yeah.
Hot
alright.
streaks.
This is a cool article. What's the actual title of it? Oh, Understanding the Onset of Hot Streaks Across Artistic, Cultural, and Scientific Careers. Y'all ever been on a hot streak?
I'm still waiting.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I hear
still
that.
waiting.
Definitely been on a cold streak, apparently looking up recipes. But hot streaks, they're ubiquitous across creative fields, but it's unclear if there's regularities across them, across the onset of a hot streak. And this is challenging because creative careers tend to be complex, but they focus on two different areas: exploration, going out and searching for ideas. This tends to be like a risky sort of approach because there's larger variance in outcomes, and exploitation, which is like drilling down on a topic. This is also risky because it has kind of stifles the creative elements here. So this article examined whether either of these are indicative of hot streaks, and what they did is super cool study. They traced the career outputs of artists, film directors, and scientists, and they mapped the career trajectory of each person, and they quantified hot streaks by the impact of their work. So for artists, as auction prices, IMDb ratings for directors, and paper citations for scientists, and like how they derived this was super cool. So like for artists, they used neural networks and computer vision to analyze the styles of 800,000 images and trace the evolution of their career, essentially trying to find this like entropy in their style. Same for directors and scientists. And they measured this exploration, entropy, and style. And what they found is before a hot streak, larger than expected Z scores, i.e., exploration, would occur. So people are having like more various styles, followed by a smaller than expected Z score, which is like that focus work. One or the other alone does not coincide with a hot streak. You really need both. And even the case when a person has more than one hot streak, this pattern holds. So, I mean, like these lucky folks with more than one hot streak. Final point, more likely to explore with a small team before a hot streak and exploit with a larger team because larger teams can further an idea, but smaller teams can create them. Super interesting study across fields. It seems to be like a pretty ubiquitous result. We've covered similar stories like this in the past.
But
Yeah.
I was really glad to hear this. I remember I've seen this from economists before, like the Freakonomics type of crowd. But I also remember I took like a Wharton people analytics, like one of those Coursera's, probably like 6 or 7 years ago now. And there was a professor on there, Cade Massey, and he was talking about how difficult it is to ever prove that good performance wasn't due to luck,
Mhm.
right?
Mm,
And so like essentially like if you have, stock traders and 30% of them are going to do well in one year, but how do you know that those 30% just didn't get lucky,
yeah.
right? And then if you go to the next year, like, well, who's good over 2 years in a row? Well, then it goes down to 15% of people or whatever. And then, well, what if that was due to luck? Right. And so it takes you like 10 years before you can ever figure out if somebody is actually good at something, right? Or if it's just because they happen to luck out 7 years in a row. And statistically speaking, you could get seven in a row of luckiness.
Yeah.
What I loved here is that they put some kind of behavioral causes on the front end that showed the relationship to why they had this hot streak afterwards. So it wasn't just because they got lucky. And I think that's a fun kind of aspect to being able to do effective research.
It's error at that point, right? It's like
Yeah.
someone could get lucky. There's no doubt. Like in poker, we'll come back to poker. Like 2% chance happens about 2% of the time. Right.
Yeah, and you have thousands of hands. That means you're going to
Yeah.
have 2% happening all the time.
Yeah.
Right. So anyway, Shuba, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I was just thinking about what you said, Cole, because I hadn't thought about it that way. I was nerding out on the information theory, the information theoretic concept and the entropy, which I haven't seen in a long time. Because I used to be convinced that this was the answer for every computational biology problem. I could never convince anyone else to use it. And so I was like, oh my God, they used it for something. Because I think information theory is a really powerful way of exploring
Yeah.
data, but I don't think it's used nearly enough. So it was cool from that point. I was nerding out on that more. But to your point about the luckiness, I think what I took away was it's never luck. When you get really good performance that's sustained over time, it is always very intentional. Like what we're now able to quantify with this paper, right? Like you have to do that exploratory thing. You have to build that bigger team so you can do the deeper exploitation piece of it. Um, and like some of it is a bit of a myth, like, oh, they got lucky and so that's why they're doing so well. Like, no, they probably did some very intentional things. They may not have realized they were doing them, but they did them. And like, wouldn't it be great if we could figure out how to get everybody to do it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like no one really sees the practice, right? They only
Yeah.
see the results.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's been so many of these researchers in sports analytics who've tried to kind of disconfirm like the hot hand theory of
Yep.
like, well, if you've made 4 shots in a row, what's your likelihood of making the 5th shot? And the answer is it goes back to whatever your base rate, your
Mm-hmm.
3-point percentages or whatever you happen to be doing. And so it just, again, you see these statistical outliers. But I don't know, maybe it's the artist in me, maybe it's just the humanist in me, but I just love this thought of, human beings can do extraordinary things sometimes if the right preparation and the right circumstances arise. And so I love this like kind of hot hand research.
I think that like it provides practical guidance too. Like say like you have writer's block. If you ever sit down and like can't figure out any words to put on a page, you need to go read more,
Yeah.
right? Like you need to like probably provide the foundation of knowledge for you. And if you find that you're all over the place and really can't, you just got a million ideas, put them on paper. Go drill down, get in that exploitation mode.
Gosh, now I'm thinking like, what happens when ChatGPT does exploration and exploitation? It reads this paper and it's like, right, I'm gonna go out and
Here's 45 other ideas for you.
yeah, I don't know.
Isn't it kind of already doing that?
Guess
Yeah.
we'll see.
Michael Arena talks about this in his book Adaptive Space. Like, if you want good ideas, go to the edge of the network. Right? That's
Yep.
that's where all the wild ideas. That's where all the people with like kind of like the weird COVID ideas that a lot of them turned out to be true. Right?
Mhm.
That's where they were. And I think it's like Sandy Pentland talks about discount redundant information. So if like everyone's telling you the exact same thing, you need to like talk to other people because all
Yeah.
that information is probably not true.
Well,
Right.
it's funny. That's like the inverse of the article Shuba and I wrote together. It's like if you want belongingness, don't go to the edge of the network. Get a lot of weak ties in the center of the network and meet a bunch of people. And so I feel like it's like almost the opposite of like if you want to. I don't know. I just had that thought.
Yeah,
Interesting.
but now I want to adapt our hypothesis a little bit to that idea of like maybe go broad as well. Have weak
Yeah.
ties, but have them broadly
You
across.
need both. Like you need strong ties to
Yeah.
provide belonging and trust, high trust relationships, and you
Yeah.
need the weak ties to find unique
Mhm.
bits of information.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's another element of this sort of exploration. Exploitation. It's just like different words for essentially the same thing, right? You
Yeah.
need both. It's a healthy balance.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
The other thing I really liked about this paper, which I don't see enough of, honestly, when we're talking about people and their creative output, is this is like there's a time aspect to this, right? Like they do the
Yeah.
exploration, then they do the exploitation, like the ordering matters and the time matters.
Hmm.
And I feel like so much, especially in people analytics, so much of what we do is like snapshot in time. Like today, the risk of
Sectional.
this, right? Like whatever. And we forget that people live in time and stuff happens over time. And if you did like more of a time series type, if you took more of that time series type perspective, you'd pick up signal that maybe you're missing because you're just like this tiny slice and then that tiny slice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes, and I love the pattern element of this as
Yes.
well. So it's like it's not just like, well, this occurred in 2023, this occurred in 2024. It's individual because we're all like living our own like continuum, right? And
Yeah.
like before I got a hot streak, I did these sort of behaviors. So that
Yep.
becomes your marker of time.
Yeah.
When it kind of to build on this point too, I feel like an understudied area in people analytics is how do people get better at things,
Yeah.
Mhm.
right? Like what are the precursors to people getting better? And that has to have a temporal dimension of going across time.
Yeah.
And we spend a lot of time either looking at the moment in time or looking at backwards 1 year, right? Like what happened over the last year, or the last month, or the last quarter. And we don't spend enough time saying, what are the pieces that it's going to take for this junior level employee to become a good senior analyst, and then a
Yeah.
good
Yeah.
manager, and then a good director, and then a good whatever. And I feel like
Mhm.
that fascinating area of research.
Yeah. And then we could maybe get L&D to actually do things that would actually help. Sorry. I think
You
I'm
hate
proud of that
L&D, boy. Coming in hot on L&D.
Well, Cole said I should come in hot on something. I've decided L&D is gonna be my dead horse to beat.
You want to talk about logistic regression and machine learning now?
Oh, yeah, sure. Do we have time? Okay, yes.
Sure.
Oh, that's my other the dead horse that I like to beat a lot, which is the, like, data scientists, man. I am one of them, but, like, there is definitely a great deal of joy in learning some new method for analyzing your data and, like, some new machine learning fancy pants thing. But the reality is, like, logistic regression, usually really robust, doesn't matter about the sample size, will get you 80 to 85% of the way to the correct answer with way less fancy bells and whistles, and
Mhm.
is therefore much more robust and reliable. And yet we are always like, oh, let's try a deep learning technique, right? And I think this is one of the dangers. If you have enough data to do deep learning, then you don't even try logistic regression. But you probably got just as good an answer, maybe better from logistic regression if you tried it first.
Because we
Um,
should explain it, right?
yeah, exactly.
Well, I love this expression that I got. I've been using it from Cassie Kazakrov, I think is how you say her name, is people data scientists collecting algorithms like Pokemon cards.
Yes.
Right? It's like, come on. Like it's fun to do. You know what I mean? There's a reason why people collect Pokemon cards, but it doesn't mean that you don't need the basics. And the expression, I can't remember who I heard this from, but it's the more you know, the less you use, right? And so it's like the more algorithms you learn, the more you just want to use linear and logistic regression. You
Yeah,
know?
because
Mhm.
I mean, you can understand it. It's well studied, so no one's going to be like, "Well, gee, what does it mean that it came up with this answer?" You're like, "These were the betas. There you go. Go knock yourself out. This is the log odds ratio. That's it." Um, yeah, I agree.
Well, it sets the stage to conduct like a real experiment, right? Experimental
Yeah,
study in a lot of cases, which we don't do enough of that either. Like, we'll find a
yeah,
nice result on paper and be like, all right, end of story. Like,
yes,
no, you're really supposed to. You talk like once again, like I'll invoke the name of Fisher. He's like, well, like once you find the result, then you got to go conduct an actual study and figure out the conditions that which
Yeah.
will occur.
Well,
yeah,
let's hit real quick on the last nerdery article we got.
Hmm.
Um, the ACLU asked for
yeah,
U.S. probe into bias of consultants' AI hiring tools. So specifically, they're calling out the firm Aon for using their tool, the Adept 15, which is a personality tool. And the ACLU is saying that Aon falsely claims that applicant screening software is bias free. And so, I mean, Scott and I have both known probably tons of people that have worked at Aon over the years, and even folks who probably helped build the Adept 15. And I feel like this goes into like basic blocking and tackling, IO psychology, personality based research related to criterion related validity studies. What the big question I have here is, what does bias free even mean? Like I've gotten to this point where there's like I think there's something like 200 versions of cognitive biases that have been identified by research. Like when somebody says a test is bias free, what do they even mean anymore? Because like I don't know if it's like do you mean that it just doesn't select people? Because like if you want to get to, like, I remember there was a point in time where I'm not going to name the vendor, but a vendor was presenting to me their psychological assessment for predicting jobs, and they bragged. They said our test is so bias free it doesn't even predict job performance. And I was like, what are you even talking about? Isn't that the whole point of doing these tests? It's like, so if it's biased, what are you biased for? Like, I don't know. Do you guys have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I got a ton of thoughts. But yeah, yes, like discrimination is a key element of any psychological assessment, right? Because you
Yeah.
discriminate between high and low performers. I talked to someone close to wink wink this sort of situation, and they were kind of in an uprage because apparently this person saw an item on the assessment that was like, I enjoy parties. And apparently there's another item on some sort of like clinical assessment of extroversion that was essentially measuring the same thing, which, you know, then they saw similarities there and found that that was, you know, biased because they're tapping into clinical issues, this sort of stuff. It's a scary world where you could run all these tests and like you could develop all these statistics, and then like someone could just like see an item and just take offense to it, right?
Yeah.
Uh, we're in a world where people like to complain a lot, and you know, there you go.
Speaking of weird item, I remember in grad school we learned about the MMPI, which is a clinical tool, and there was like an item on there. It's like sometimes I have black tarry stool, and I was like, that's weird. That's so weird.
Yeah.
Like, why would you ever ask anybody this? But I don't think that's what Aon is doing in this case. I don't think they're asking people about black tarry stool. So I
It's
don't
like
know.
the ACLU claims that the Adept 15 disadvantages people with mental health disabilities, which I don't necessarily know what they mean by that, but like by all means, if someone has borderline personality disorder,
Hmm.
that's an extreme example. I don't want them around me. I don't want them in my company. I hope that your assessment is weeding these people out in some capacity. The other
Well,
sort of interesting thing they brought up here is like the grid challenge gamified cognability tool with a large disparity between white and black participants, which I would not expect based on the normal distribution that you typically find. That's an interesting finding. I would want to look into that.
yeah.
That was more where I was going with it, was like, I wish I could
Mm.
see what the analysis was. The specific things they were saying were biasing selection in some way that wasn't ideal. Because it
Yeah,
felt
because
to me like the things they were describing felt like regular tools from psychology, which are in theory well validated and not likely to be discriminatory based on things like race or.
Mhm.
But I wondered also about, are some of them discriminatory just based on how aware you are of a particular cultural context? So,
yeah.
for example, if you run this test and it makes perfect sense to Americans, but you're interviewing people from India or China or whatever, and they don't have
Absolutely.
that cultural context, then maybe they do really poorly. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's like the weird countries or whatever they call them, the WERIRD. You know what I'm talking about? It's like
Yeah,
Western educated
Oh,
something something
something.
something.
Yeah.
I thought you were going
Um,
a different route there.
no, no. I, I should probably know the acronym if I'm going to lean into that one though. But the point is, like, I guess I just kind of take issue. Like, there's been so many decades of research about the relationship between personality and job performance, right? And that it's actually one of the ways that's least biased
Yeah.
that's out there. And then so it's like, if we're now making attacks on this type of methodology, what's left? What is it? Just random chance? Should we just be flipping coins to hire people? What should we be doing? Because like, and again, I don't know the exact circumstances of what they're saying this is disadvantaging and what groups that Aon is using this for. But if it's just the general use of like personality to select for jobs, like what what are we coming to here? Like, this seems like pretty reductive.
Compared to what, right? Like just random choice. You know, I
Yeah,
guess in this case, or just like go back to the days of nepotism or manager judgment. You know, just
exactly.
do I like you? Do I not like you? And I can't imagine that things would work out well for people with disabilities in general in that under
Yeah.
that system.
When I think this kind of came up with that New York City law that came up a while back is One of the things that I think that like IO psychologists and people analytics in particular don't do is we don't advocate for ourselves well.
Mm.
It's like laws are coming along that are really dumb. They're really dumb and really incomplete that people aren't taking into consideration the unintended consequences of them and why there was wisdom in the first place for why they were doing things. Like I think we need to have a voice sometimes to say like, hey, perhaps you should back off a little bit because maybe there was a good reason we were using personality. I don't know. Do you ever consider that? I think this is where I kind of come into it.
I've had people like straight up say like psychology isn't real. And just like, I don't believe in what you do. It's like, oh, okay, well, F you, first off. But
And they may not be wrong.
it's definitely a soft science because of all these sort of issues. Like there's all sorts of internal pressures, external pressures, all this sort of stuff, which is where like computational biology is perhaps a little bit it lends itself better to like bigger effect sizes and easier to sort of see the signal through the noise.
Oh, you'd be surprised. When I was all the way through grad school and even like my first few years out in the world, people will tell you biology is not a real science as well, right? Like it's not hard science like chemistry or physics. And I'm like, okay, we're talking about really, really complex systems. So no, we can't perfectly model it, but physics doesn't know how the universe started. So,
What's your favorite paper, Shuba? Like for us, like I don't know. It used to be Schmidt and Hunter. Now that's been kind of blown up recently.
Yeah. Well, and the thing that is hung around from Schmidt and Hunter was the conscientiousness thing, which apparently the ACLU doesn't like now. So it's like, what's left?
Do you have a paper that sticks out in your mind? You're like, all right, yeah, this is my go-to citation.
Not in psychology. I'm still learning that. I'm still
in biology.
Stuff. Oh, in biology. Well, so I love information theory. Like I say, it was like that was my like data scientist moment of like, oh, I need to use this cool thing somewhere, and I never found a way to really use it. So that was very sad. But I loved those original papers from like the late 40s and early 50s, like right after World War II, because a lot of information theory work was done as part of code breaking.
Yeah.
And those papers are so fun. I mean, if you're a nerd like me,
no IRBs, just wild, wild west.
Yes.
Well, Shuba, every time we talk, I get like a new insight, from you. And I love your background in computational biology. And I really think that people analytics should be adopting some techniques that, why do we need such large sample sizes? Why can't we take smaller pieces of data and extrapolate from there, using permutations and simulations and those type of things. So I love your perspective, and I'm really glad you were able to join us today. Scott, any final words for Shuba before we wrap up?
Shuba's a blast. Hopefully I'll be your spirit animal someday. We'll find out.
All right. Thank you. This has been so much fun. Thank you both. I love your podcast. I love the perspectives you bring to it. And I feel like every time I listen to one of these podcasts, I go up and like look up all the references and things. It's like my personal IO psychology journal club. So thank you for that.
And you got to experience what it's like to record the intro to the episode, and it's much harder than it looks. So that's good too. Yeah. But you've been listening to Directionally Correct, a People Analytics podcast, and with Cole and Scott, and today's guest, Shuba Gopal. So thanks for joining us, Shuba.
Thank you.
Directionally Correct is dedicated to you, our listeners, to help educate and entertain you on how to effectively do people analytics. By supporting this podcast, you are helping us continue to provide valuable insights and knowledge to our listeners. Please consider becoming a patron of the podcast. You can find the link to sign up in the show notes or at patron.podbean.com/directionallycorrect. Thanks for your support.